Judge Frank Caprio had overseen over 250,000 cases across his 38-year tenure. He had encountered murderers, saints, deceivers, heroes, every type of person who might cross the threshold of a courtroom. He took pride in never forgetting a face, a name, or a case of significance. But that Tuesday morning, when the woman in the worn blue dress approached his bench, when her eyes met his, eyes he felt he should recognize but didn't, and when she spoke those 5 trembling words, something stirred in him that he had never experienced in nearly 4 decades on the bench, an utter, paralyzing blankness. "Your Honor, don't you remember me?" Silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Caprio fixed his gaze on her, scanning her features, probing the depths of his memory. Who was she? Why did she look at him as if he ought to know her, as if it were imperative that he did? And why, when he met her eyes, did a cold sense of dread coil in his stomach, the sensation that he had forgotten something vital, something that could change everything once it came back to him? It was Tuesday, January 14th, 9:47 a.m., and Providence Municipal Court was working through its morning docket. Judge Caprio had already handled 12 cases, a typical blend of traffic offenses, minor disputes, and petty violations. Case number 2025, CV 4421, was called City of Providence versus Catherine Miller. Charges: failure to appear for a previous court date, contempt of court. The courtroom doors opened, and a woman entered deliberately with the careful steps of someone who had rehearsed this moment countless times. She appeared to be in her mid to late 50s, maybe 60. Her dark hair was streaked with gray. She wore a plain blue dress that had clearly seen better days. Yet it was her eyes that drew Judge Caprio's attention. Dark brown, full of something he could not immediately identify, something that seemed a mix of hope, fear, and recognition. Judge Caprio's memory for faces was exceptional. It had always been one of his strengths. He rarely forgot anyone who had stood before his bench. But as Catherine Miller approached and he studied her features, trying to place her, a flicker of doubt stirred. She seemed familiar, yet he couldn't recall why. And the way she looked at him, as though he should know her instantly, filled him with unease. The prosecutor, ADA Michael Chin, stepped forward to present the case. "Your Honor, Emma Miller failed to appear for scheduled court date on December 3rd concerning unpaid parking tickets. This constitutes contempt of court. A bench warrant was issued, and Ms. Miller has surrendered herself this morning." Judge Caprio examined the file. 3 unpaid parking tickets from a previous summer, totaling $180, and a missed court date. Typical case. He glanced up at Catherine Miller. "Miller, you missed your December 3rd court date. Can you tell me why?" Catherine stood completely still, hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she said something that made Judge Caprio's blood run cold. "Your Honor, don't you remember me?" The courtroom fell silent. Every eye turned to Judge Caprio, waiting for his reaction. He studied her face closely. Should he recognize her? Had she been in his courtroom before? He saw hundreds of people each month. Maybe he'd simply forgotten. "I'm sorry, Mayor, have you appeared in my court previously?" he asked. "Yes," she replied softly. "But not as a defendant." "Not as a defendant?" He leaned forward, puzzled. "What do you mean by that? Can you clarify when you were here?" Tears welled in Catherine's eyes. "March 17th, 1985. I was 12 years old 40 years ago." Judge Caprio recalled that he had been on the bench only 3 years at the time, new, eager, and idealistic, determined to make a difference. "You were 12 in 1985. Were you a witness in a case?" he asked. "No, Your Honor," Catherine said, her voice cracking. "I was the victim." Judge Caprio felt a sudden dryness in his mouth. 1985, a 12-year-old victim. He had overseen several cases involving children that year, though the details were hazy. 40 years was a long time. Yet the date, March 17th, stirred a faint memory. And the way Catherine looked at him, tears glistening in her eyes, suggested that the events of that day had shaped her entire life. And he had completely forgotten. His mind raced back through the years. 1985. March, a child victim. What kind of case would involve a child in court? Slowly, fragments of memory began to emerge, not complete, but enough to tug at recognition. A little girl with dark hair crying on the witness stand, a man in handcuffs, a mother screaming, something about custody. "Miller," Judge Caprio said cautiously, "I handle many cases in 1985. Can you help me recall the details?" Catherine drew a shaky breath. "You presided over my parents' custody battle. My father was trying to gain custody of me and my sister, and my mother was fighting to keep us." A custody case that helped narrow it down. Judge Caprio had dealt with dozens of such cases in his early years. And what was the outcome, he asked. Catherine's expression shifted, a mix of pain and gratitude that would stay with Judge Caprio forever. You granted custody to my mother. You ruled my father unfit. You saved my life that day, Your Honor. And you don't remember me. It wasn't a question or a complaint. It was the harsh truth laid bare. Judge Caprio felt a weight settle deep in his chest. This woman, Catherine Miller, was telling him that 4 decades ago he had made a decision that had literally saved her life. A choice so critical that she remembered the exact day it happened. A choice he, apparently, had completely forgotten. Miller, I'm sorry. I don't recall the details of the case. Can you help me remember? Catherine Miller began recounting her story, and as she spoke, fragments of memory started clicking into place in Judge Caprio's mind. But what unsettled him most wasn't the lapse of memory. It was what Catherine was about to disclose about why she had come to his courtroom today, 40 years after he saved her life. She wasn't here over parking tickets at all. Your Honor, Catherine said, her voice steadier now, in 1985, my parents were divorcing. My father wanted custody. To everyone else, he seemed like a perfect dad. Successful businessman, nice home, respected by the community. My mother was a waitress, no money, no education. On paper, my father looked like the better choice. Judge Caprio listened, the memory sharpening in his mind. But my mother knew something no one else did. My father, he hurt us, me and my sister Emily. Not in a way you could see, no broken bones. But he was cruel, psychologically abusive, and he began touching me in ways a father should never touch a child. Judge Caprio closed his eyes for a moment. Yes. He remembered the custody case where the mother had accused the father of sexual abuse. There was no physical proof, just the testimony of a terrified 12-year-old girl. The case came down to one thing, whether you would believe me, Catherine continued. I was 12. I was terrified. I had to testify in front of my father, in front of everyone, and you really listened. Even without proof. Even as my father's lawyer insisted, I was lying. You believed me. Judge Caprio's hands trembled as the memory flooded back. He remembered the little girl on the witness stand, barely above a whisper. The father, charming and self-assured, insisting the accusations were fabricated. The pressure from colleagues, warning him he was making a mistake by trusting an uncorroborated child's words. But he had looked into that small girl's eyes and known she was telling the truth. You gave custody to my mother, Catherine said. You ruled that, despite her financial struggles, she was the safer parent. And you were right, because 3 years later, my father was arrested for molesting his new wife's daughter. He went to prison for 15 years. The courtroom fell completely silent. You saved me, Your Honor, and my sister. If you had given custody to my father, Catherine's voice faltered, unable to finish. Judge Caprio felt tears welling up. Miller, I'm grateful I made the right decision, but I am ashamed I don't remember you. That I forgot such a crucial case. You've handled thousands of cases since then, Catherine said softly, her tone forgiving. I understand, Catherine said softly, but I thought about you every single day for 40 years. You're the reason I'm still here. You're the reason I got to grow up. You're the reason I have a family of my own now. Judge Caprio brushed at his eyes, stunned by the reality that a choice he'd made 4 decades earlier had echoed through time in ways he could never have predicted. Then his gaze drifted down to the file in front of him, a contempt charge, a missed appearance, and something didn't make sense. Why would Catherine Miller, someone who clearly held him in such high respect, intentionally skip a court date in his courtroom? Unless she had wanted to stand before him again. But for what reason? He looked at her more intently. Ms. Miller, I need to ask you something. These parking tickets, the missed appearance, did you do this on purpose? Did you want to be in my courtroom again? The answer was written on her face before she spoke. Yes, Your Honor. Why? Why not simply reach out to my office? Why go through all of this? Catherine's hands shook slightly. Because I needed to ask you something in person, in a courtroom, where it's official. A cold unease crept back into Judge Caprio's chest. Ask me what? She inhaled deeply. Your Honor, my sister Emily, the one you save alongside me, she passed away 3 years ago. Cancer. She was only 49. I'm very sorry, he said gently. She left behind a daughter. My niece, Sarah. She's 14 now. And Sarah's father, my sister's ex-husband, is trying to get custody, just like my father did 40 years ago. And just like back then, on paper he looks perfect. Good job, nice house. But I know he's dangerous. Sarah has told me things that sound exactly like what my father did to me. The judge's heart sank. Ms. Miller, custody cases aren't handled in municipal court. That falls under family court. I know, she said quickly. The case is scheduled for next week. Different courtroom, different judge. Someone who has no idea what happened back then. Someone who might make the same decision everyone expected you to make 40 years ago, giving custody to the parent who looks better on paper. She opened her purse and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. I wrote you a letter. Everything Sarah has told me, everything I recognize from my own childhood. I'm not asking you to rule on the case, I know you can't. But I'm asking you to forward this to the family court judge. To tell them what you witnessed all those years ago. To help them understand that sometimes children tell the truth even when there's no evidence. Judge Caprio accepted the letter with trembling hands. What she was asking was highly unusual. He wasn't supposed to influence another judge's ruling. But sitting before him was a woman he had rescued 40 years ago, now pleading for the chance to save her niece from a very same fate. And Judge Caprio suddenly faced a decision no judge ever wants. He could follow official protocol and remain silent, or step outside the rules in hopes of protecting another child. Miller, Judge Caprio said slowly, what you're asking of me, I can't formally intervene in another judge's case. That would be improper, possibly even considered judicial misconduct. Catherine's expression dropped. I understand. I'm sorry. I didn't know where else to turn. You were the only one who believed me 4 decades ago. I thought maybe. Let me finish, Judge Caprio interrupted gently. I can't get involved in an official capacity, but there is something else I can do. He lifted his phone and dialed. This is Judge Caprio. I need to speak with Judge Patricia Morrison in family court. Yes, I'll wait. Catherine watched, a spark of hope returning. After a moment, Judge Caprio spoke into the receiver. Patricia Frank Caprio. I need a word about a case you have next week, the Sarah Williams custody matter. Yes, that one. I have some background information that may influence your decision. Can I come by this afternoon? Thank you. He ended the call and turned back to Catherine. Judge Morrison is an old colleague, and more importantly, she's an exceptional judge who genuinely prioritizes the welfare of children. I'll give her your letter, not as an official document, but as historical context. I'll tell her about your case from 1985. I'll explain why sometimes a child's voice must be trusted, even when there's no hard evidence. Catherine was crying openly now. Thank you. Thank you so much. But Ms. Miller, he continued, you need to understand there is no guarantee she will decide the case the way you hope. She is an independent judge. She will reach her own verdict based on the evidence before her. All I can do is ensure she knows the full story. That's all I want, Catherine replied. Just a chance. Just someone listening the way you listen to me. Judge Caprio nodded. As for your contempt charge, I'm dismissing it. But the parking fines still have to be paid. Can you cover the $180? Catherine nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I can pay today. Good. Pay the clerk before you leave. He paused. And Ms. Miller, I apologize for not remembering you, but I'm glad you came. You gave me something today, confirmation that a decision I made 40 years ago mattered. Judges don't often get to know that. But Catherine Miller wasn't finished. What she said next explained why she didn't settle for a letter or phone call, why she needed to stand in that courtroom and face Judge Caprio directly. Because there was something she had never shared with anyone, not even her own children. Something she had carried since 1985. Your Honor, Catherine said, barely above a whisper. There's something else. Something I've never told anyone. Judge Caprio waited silently. That day in 1985, when I was on the stand, when I described what my father had done, I looked at you, and you did something that changed everything. What was that? He asked. You nodded. Just the slightest nod. No one else noticed. But I saw it, and in that instant I knew you believed me. Before any ruling, before a single word left your mouth, I knew. That small nod, that subtle gesture, it's what kept me alive. She brushed away her tears. Because for years afterward, whenever life got tough, whenever I questioned myself, whenever I wondered if it had all been imagined, I remembered that nod. I remembered that one person, a judge, someone with authority, someone who mattered, had believed me, had recognized me, had known the truth of what I was saying. Catherine looked straight at Judge Caprio. That's why I needed to be here in person to tell you that 40 years ago, you didn't just issue a legal ruling. You gave a 12-year-old girl permission to trust herself, to believe her own memories, to know she wasn't losing her mind. Judge Caprio was silent, overcome by the gravity of Catherine's words, that a gesture he likely didn't even recall had carried her through decades. So thank you, Catherine finished, not just for the ruling, but for that nod, for seeing me, for believing me when no one else did. Judge Caprio rose from his bench, an uncommon action, and moved toward where Catherine stood. What followed would become one of the most unforgettable moments in Providence municipal court history, because he was about to break protocol in a way he never had before. He descended from a bench and stood directly before Catherine Miller. Without a word, he opened his arms. Catherine collapsed into the embrace, sobbing. The courtroom remained in stunned silence, witnessing a judge hug a former defendant, a breach of every protocol, every professional boundary, every rule of judicial conduct. But in that moment, rules meant nothing. "Thank you," he said softly, just loud enough for Catherine to hear. "Thank you for reminding me why I do this work. Thank you for showing me that I made a difference. And thank you for giving me the chance to help Sarah. I promise I will do everything I can to ensure Judge Morrison understands what's at stake." They stayed like that for nearly a minute, a judge and the woman he had saved 40 years earlier, before Catherine finally stepped back, wiped her tears, and smiled. "I should let you get back to work," she said. "Miller, Catherine, before you go, I need to tell you something," Judge Caprio said. She paused, waiting. "You said I saved your life. But meeting you today, hearing your story, realizing that a decision I made mattered, you've saved something in me too. You've reminded me that every case counts. Every decision echoes forward. Every child who stands before a judge deserves to be believed, to be heard, to be seen." His voice strengthened. "I won't forget you again. I promise. And I won't forget Sarah. That little girl deserves the same chance you had, and I will make damn sure she gets it." Catherine nodded, speechless. As she turned to leave, Judge Caprio called after her one last time. "Catherine, when Sarah's case is resolved, whatever the outcome, will you let me know?" "Yes, Your Honor. I will." That afternoon, Judge Caprio sat in Judge Patricia Morrison's chambers, recounting the story of Catherine Miller. He shared her letter. He outlined the similarities between 1985 and the present day. He spoke about the critical need to trust children, even when there is no physical proof. Judge Morrison listened intently. She was a seasoned family court judge, someone Judge Caprio had unwavering confidence in. "Frank," she said when he finished, "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, and I'll take everything you've shared into account. But you understand that my decision must be based on the evidence in this case, not events from 40 years ago." "I understand," he replied. "I'm not asking you to decide a certain way. I just want you to remember that children sometimes tell the truth in ways that don't appear in medical reports or police files." "I will remember," Judge Morrison promised. 1 week later, the custody hearing for Sarah Williams was held. Catherine Miller sat in the gallery, her hands clasped tightly in prayer. Sarah's father appeared confident, impeccably dressed, and represented by a high-powered attorney. Sarah herself was 14, 2 years older than Catherine had been when she gave her testimony. Yet her story echoed Catherine's experience in chilling ways, inappropriate touching, psychological manipulation, fear disguised as affection. Judge Morrison absorbed every word. She reviewed the documentation, spoke privately with Sarah, and weighed the father's spotless record, financial stability, and seemingly devoted demeanor before delivering her decision. In cases involving allegations of abuse, especially when raised by a child, the court must strike a careful balance, she explained. "We have to protect children from harm, while ensuring we do not unjustly accuse innocent parents. This balance is never simple." Catherine held her breath. Having listened to Sarah's testimony, observed her behavior, and considered the historical context provided by her family, I find her account credible. While there is no physical evidence of abuse, there is a concerning pattern of behavior. Therefore, Judge Morrison said, looking directly at Sarah's father, I am granting primary custody to Sarah's aunt, Catherine Miller, with supervised visitation for the father. Should Mr. Williams wish to seek expanded custody in the future, he may do so after completing a court-ordered psychological evaluation and parenting program. Catherine's tears spilled over. Beside her, Sarah took her hand. They had won. 3 days later, Catherine returned to Providence Municipal Court, not as a defendant this time, but to fulfill a promise she had made, bringing something for Judge Caprio that he would cherish for the rest of his career. She walked into his courtroom during a recess. He spotted her immediately and smiled. "Catherine, I heard about Judge Morrison's ruling. Congratulations." "Thank you, Your Honor, for everything. I also wanted you to meet someone." A teenage girl stepped forward. Dark hair framed serious eyes, but there was a lightness about her, a quiet relief that a heavy burden had been lifted. "This is Sarah," Catherine said. Judge Caprio descended from a bench and shook her hand. "It's wonderful to meet you, Sarah. I'm glad you're safe now." "Thank you, sir," Sarah replied softly. "Aunt Catherine told me what you did, how you believed her when she was my age, and how you helped make sure someone believed me too." Sarah reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote you something," she said. "It's not much, but I wanted you to have it." Judge Caprio unfolded the sheet. It was a letter, handwritten on notebook paper. "Dear Judge Caprio, my Aunt Catherine says you saved her life when she was 12. Now you've helped save mine at 14. I don't know if I would have had the courage to tell the truth if Aunt Catherine hadn't shared her story about you, about how you believed her when no one else would. Thank you for showing me that sometimes adults do listen. Sometimes those in power really do care. Sometimes the system actually works. I'm going to be okay now. And one day, when I'm grown, I want to help kids like me, kids who need someone to believe them. Thank you for starting that chain 40 years ago. Thank you for believing my aunt, because that's how you saved me too. Sarah Williams." Judge Caprio read the letter twice, tears slipping down his cheeks. When he lifted his eyes, both Catherine and Sarah were crying as well. "May I keep this?" he asked. "It's yours," Sarah replied. He carefully folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. "I'm going to frame this," he said. "I'll put it next to my law degree on the wall. Because this is exactly why I became a judge." He turned to Catherine. 40 years ago, I made a choice that changed your life. Today, you've given me the greatest gift a judge can receive, the proof that the work matters, that our decisions can ripple through generations." Catherine smiled. "Your Honor, there's one more thing." "What's that?" "Do you remember 40 years ago, nodding at me during my testimony?" "I do now," he said. "You told me about it." "Well," she said, "I want you to know." I'm nodding back. Through her tears, she smiled. 40 years later, I'm nodding back to say thank you. To say I see you. To say I believe in you, just like you believed in me. And she did, just a tiny nod, barely noticeable, only for Judge Caprio. He nodded back. Sarah Williams graduated from law school at 24, specializing in family law, with a focus on child advocacy. Catherine Miller was there at her graduation, glowing with pride. And so was Judge Frank Caprio, now retired, yet still present at every milestone of someone he had once helped. During her valedictory address, Sarah shared, "I became a lawyer because when I was 14, 2 people believed me when I spoke the truth. My Aunt Catherine, and a judge who had believed her 40 years earlier. This is for every child who needs someone to listen, someone to notice, someone to nod." After the ceremony, Sarah approached Judge Caprio. "I have something for you," she said, offering a small box. Inside lay a miniature gavel, engraved with the words, "The nod that changed everything. 1985, 2025, forever." Judge Caprio held it, overcome with emotion. "You taught me that the smallest acts, a nod, a moment of trust, can save lives," Sarah said. "I wanted you to have this as a reminder that your impact went far beyond rulings. You changed the path of generations." He looked at Sarah, the niece of the girl he had once saved, the next generation of believers, living proof that justice carries meaning. In that moment, he grasped a profound truth. We can never know which instant will matter most. A nod during testimony, a seemingly routine verdict, choosing to believe a child when proof is scarce, those moments ripple outward, shaping lives we may never meet, crafting futures we may never witness. And sometimes, 40 years later, someone enters your courtroom and says, "Don't you remember me?" Even if the details have faded, the impact lingers. Justice is not just about the decision itself. It's about the ripple effects, the lives preserved, the children safeguarded, the chains of belief that endure across decades. Judge Frank Caprio kept Sarah's letter and the tiny gavel on his desk for the rest of his days. Whenever he questioned whether his work mattered, Whenever he wondered if he had truly made a difference, he would look at those two items and remember, he may have forgotten Catherine Miller's face for 40 years, but she had never forgotten his nod. And that single nod had saved 2 generations.